I will say, my whole life, my whole childhood, my whole teen years, everyone said to me, Caleb, you're going to love college. You're going to love college. College is going to be so amazing. You're a bookish guy and you're going to love college. I hated college. I was not happy at college at all, because the reason my relatives and family members were all telling me I was going to love college is because they were from a different generation. And in the past, academics, university, that was where people went to dissent, right? It was the anti-Vietnam War movement had been on the college campuses, and that most of the population had this support the government, love it or leave it, if you don't like it here, move attitude. But the universities were the place where people learned to think more critically, right? That was kind of the role they played in Cold War America. That role has completely flipped. And now it's the population that is questioning things now, largely. I mean, Trump just won the election, and a lot of people among the population are very angry, and their living standards are going down, and people are questioning why things are happening. And the university is where you go to get vetted, to make sure you're not a dissident, to make sure you can be trusted for a job in that cosmopolitan middle class, and universities are actually places where people think more in line with the establishment than most people among the population do. It's interesting to see how that flip has worked. But the kind of the neocon era, the rise of neoconservatism was this attitude of, people on the campuses and intellectuals might be disagreeing, but the bulk of the population are just kind of blind believers in the system. And now the universities are where people are blind believers in the system, where you learn to be a blind believer in U.S. foreign policy. You learn to repeat the lies against whatever country is being attacked. You learn the human rights talking points and diversity, equity, and inclusion and all that stuff. And among the population, people are like, my living standards are going down. I don't trust the government. I'm questioning things. And that's one thing that I think is worth pointing out, that we have kind of a new setup in the way dissent is being managed in the United States. Universities, college campuses, et cetera, are ground zero for all the regime change wars. And they're also the places where people are taught that, certain things are conspiracy theories. And I always tell people, I mean, I am so tired of arguing with people where they can't refute what you're saying. The facts are the facts. They can't refute that, but they argue against you based on, well, you sound like somebody who might be repeating Russian propaganda. Or this sounds like something that Russia might say. Is it true or not? Or this sounds like something a Trump supporter might say. Okay, but is it true or is it not?
Why do you think that
sounds like a conspiracy theory. Is it true or is it not? I mean, and that's the way they train people to argue in college. There's certain sets of bad people you're not supposed to sound like: Russian propagandists, conspiracy theorists, Trump supporters. And if you sound like those people, you're not going to get a promotion in this cosmopolitan middle class world. So you get vetted, and that's what the universities have become.
Why do you think it flipped like that? I mean, because you're right, that wasn't always the case. I mean, initially it was, and I'm blaming the left on this because this seems to be more of a left thing. Why do you think that happened? I mean, in the old days, you had people like Noam Chomsky, the First Amendment is for people to say things that the rest of the people, the very point of the First Amendment is to protect speech that you don't particularly like. Nobody needs to protect speech that everybody likes. You used to get lefties who used to dissent, like even Martin Luther King, for God's sake. I mean, like, people forget he was a socialist. On top of that, I mean, they even carved that aspect of who he is out of it and just break it all the way down to civil rights. How do you think it got to be that way? If you listen to, for example, the Democratic Party today, the Democratic Party, they associate this notion of being left with diversity. And I don't mean diversity in a negative sense. I mean it in the sense where you're carving up nationalities as if these things are very different from each other, despite the fact that all of them have this kind of economic base that everybody cares about the economics of these things. I've noticed that among Democrats, they would say, well, that sounds like Putin, or that sounds like the Syria apologists. And you're right, where I would point out, yeah, but it's true. Like, regardless of who says it, Hitler likes dogs. Okay, so just because you're a dog lover doesn't mean you also like Hitler. That's not really the case. You may say something that just so happens to be a true thing. Just because Putin believes 2 + 2 is 4 doesn't mean it's not 4. It's kind of that assessment. Where do you think that degradation of thought has come from? I mean, do you think that's something that is being pushed by schools or just a liberal thing? I mean, I see this more among liberals than I do among anybody else on the political spectrum.
Well, I think there's been an economic shift since the Cold War. During the Cold War, what held US society together was a very comfortable industrial middle class of auto workers and steel workers and people who worked in good paying industrial jobs, who had a very high standard of living. And that kind of bought their loyalty to the American government and the American system, right? And we don't have that anymore. I mean, since the 1980s, especially, and more especially since the 2008 financial meltdown, we just don't have that stable, prosperous industrial middle class we once had. So the people who may have been part of that at one point, who lived a comfortable life, and they're not there, and they're not getting that comfort. The other thing is that I think during the Cold War, the universities kind of played the role almost of like the troubleshooter of U.S. society. Their job was for people that got education, and they were there to kind of point to the problems in U.S. society and fix them, and be kind of the critic who was there to kind of make things better. Whereas now, the universities, I think, are a part of the apparatus of maintaining the institutions of the U.S. society that do exist, right? It's not like they're there to play the role of the critic. They're more there to kind of vet people for roles in this kind of government bureaucracy, or in the NGO apparatus, or in the kind of institutions that carry out these policies, which are now much more essential.